Tragically, over the weekend, there was yet another mass shooting in the United States, this time in Jacksonville, Florida, in which a white supremacist killed 3 black people before killing himself. And as a result, the community is furious, understandably, with Governor Ron DeSantis for not only failing to prevent this tragedy, but also for helping to create an environment in which tragedies like this can occur. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. All right, folks, so this is a tragedy. I hate to say it, but it's a fairly predictable level of tragedy because the United States has a unique issue with gun violence and mass shootings, particularly relative to its size and wealth and resources. This is something that other advanced nations simply don't struggle with, not nearly to the extent that we do. And obviously, the Democratic Party has been insufficient in terms of curtailing the issues, but at least overall, there are solutions coming out of that party or being proposed by that party, and it's being thwarted every step of the way, in particular by bad faith Republican operatives and their surrogates in the media and conservative thought leaders who, and I'm just going to say this very bluntly, in aggregate, Republican leadership and conservative leadership seem to value guns more than the lives of members of the community. And the reason I say that is because where is their time, effort, and energy? If their time, effort, and energy were better spent towards protecting the community, I might be persuaded to believe otherwise. But since instead they're more concerned with the vague and ridiculous, they're trying to appeal the Second Amendment, they're coming for my bazooka, that sort of thing, it's kind of lends itself well, very bluntly speaking, to the notion that conservatives, in terms of its leadership, and Republicans, in terms of their leadership, are not really interested in situations like this. So, here's what happened. On Saturday, a white supremacist killed 3 black people, I think at a Dollar General in Jacksonville, Florida. Hundreds of people gathered Sunday at prayer vigils in church in frustration and exhaustion to mourn yet another racist attack in America. This one, the killing of 3 black people in Florida at the hands of a white 21-year-old man who authorities say left behind white supremacist ramblings that read like the diary of a madman. I'm going to stop right here because what you'll see on Twitter, unless something's changed in the past 5 minutes, what you will see on Twitter is prominent, again, conservative and Republican leaders talking about, wow, I can't believe they released the manifesto of this white supremacist shooter, and yet we still don't have the manifesto written by this one shooter out of Nashville because by implication, Republicans and conservatives are trying to implicate the trans community in that shooting. Just want to say for the record, unless something's changed in the past 5 minutes, that manifesto at the time of this recording, the manifesto out of Jacksonville, Florida, has not been released. Okay, so they're just simply lying about that. Following services earlier that day, about 200 people showed up at a Sunday evening vigil a block from the Dollar Store General store in Jacksonville, where officials say Ryan Palmeter opened fire Sunday using guns he bought legally, despite a past involuntary commitment for a mental health exam. So I'm going to repeat that. Using guns he bought legally, despite a past involuntary commitment for a mental health exam. Which now brings us to Ron DeSantis, okay? Ron DeSantis is the governor of Florida. He's the chief executive of Florida, although you may struggle to remember that since he has spent most of his time, again, campaigning across the nation less than a year after he won re-election. He won re-election in 2022, November 2022, along with the midterms. And yet he's basically been focusing on a nationwide presidential campaign even before he announced. I mean, my God, he was spending so much time in other cities and states, trying to litigate BS culture war issues as kind of a pretext to his presidential run. This man does not care about Florida, very obviously, because his attention is elsewhere, on himself and on a national set of ambitions. But as this article points out, and as we're going to discuss elsewhere, DeSantis has done no favors for Florida with respect to curtailing gun violence. He's loosened gun laws in Florida, as a matter of fact. That's been a principal part of his governorship and his reelection bid when he was running for governor in 2022. So as a result, a lot of people are understandably upset with DeSantis because in addition to that, he has also fostered the culture war rhetoric, which, help create situations like this or help lend themselves to that sort of environment. So I want to play a clip here in which Ron DeSantis shows up at one of these vigils to give public remarks. I want you to see how he is, how the community responds to him.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is here. We're going to ask the governor if he will come now and turn remarks. my funds to be able to help one make sure they.
So yeah, they are understandably upset with the governor. Listen, and here's the thing: set partisanship aside, he's the chief executive, right? There's a degree of command responsibility, right, to protect the community. So some level of frustration would be understandable, even if he were a Democratic governor, for that matter. Okay. But it's just so much more than that. Not only has this man gone out of his way to loosen gun restrictions in Florida, he has also made culture war a primary component of his gubernatorial races, of his administration, and of his attempts to win the presidency. Issues of race and education, this is part of an NBC op-ed, are part of a broader culture war agenda that has defined DeSantis' time in office and has been a hallmark of his 2024 presidential campaign. The agenda regularly has him at odds with civil rights leaders who say his war on wokeness is a thinly veiled attempt to go after people of color and other marginalized communities in the state. He has had an all-out attack on the black community with his anti-woke policies, which we know very well was nothing more than a dog whistle to get folks riled up in a way it just happened yesterday, said State Representative Angie Nixon, a black Democrat who represents Jacksonville. Okay, now, it's fair criticism to make. I don't see how anybody could take issue with that. You have a regressively conservative, both regressively economically and socially, a socially and economically regressively conservative governor who has made, in terms of again, a mass shooting in his state, in Jacksonville, two major pillars of his gubernatorial campaign and his presidential campaign have certainly contributed to this environment. Number one, restricting gun restrictions, like loosening gun restrictions, making it easier for, yes, even people who have, been involuntarily committed for a mental health episode to get access to firearms. And then a second pillar, of course, being fomenting this situation in which there are this war on wokeness, which again, as even civil rights leaders point out, I mean, what do you think the inevitable implications are, especially from racists, which are inordinately comprised in the Republican Party, whether we like it or not. Not all Republicans are racist, but it does seem like here in the United States, most, if not all, racists are Republican. What's it going to do in a situation like this? So as controversial as my comments may seem, and I really don't think they are, and I don't. I think that this is just a blunt talk. Ron DeSantis has contributed to an environment where the motive and means for situations like this, for tragedies like this, are increased. And so it's good that he is being held publicly accountable in terms of the backlash that he's had to look members of this community in the eye and see their rage and their anger and their disappointment and their contempt for this man and what he represents, because he deserves it.